Boston Scientific has reached a $188 million settlement nationwide over its phony marketing claims about certain surgical mesh products. These products were found to be totally unnecessary for most procedures and ended up causing extreme pain and bleeding among patients, absolutely permanent injury. I've got Robert Price with me, who's one of the lawyers that made all that happen, has been involved with the mesh case for a long time. Robert, tell us about this litigation, but fill us in about what this is about. What is the case about, why the settlement, and what's ahead of us?
Thanks for having me on, Mike. So the Boston Scientific settlement was a settlement about the pelvic mesh products, which were products that were implanted in women to treat incontinence and pelvic organ prolapse and things like that.
And you worked that case as well.
We've been working that case and many other manufacturers for over 10 years. And essentially this was a settlement on behalf of AGs around the country that found that Boston Scientific had misled consumers, misled doctors about the true risks associated with the devices.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so give us a recap on what you're doing right now.
So what we're doing now is we see a lot of these same manufacturers did the pelvic meshes, also have done hernia meshes for many years, and it's the same byproduct. It's the same synthetic plastic polymer used to repair hernias, as well as the pelvic organ issues as we just talked about as well.
Well, you're talking about the material, but the thing that struck me is when you discovered that they were using non-medical grade material. Talk about they're using fishing line basically that's sold in a fishing store. Talk about that.
Absolutely. What was uncovered in trials a few years ago, and what we're working up the backstory even deeper. What some companies do, not necessarily all of them, but several companies do this, is they use a non-medical grade byproduct. So literally just bottom shelf, not approved for human usage type stuff. It breaks down, it degrades.
It actually says not approved for human use, right?
The stuff that you get from the factory actually comes with a warning that says do not use this in the human body.
But they used it anyway.
They use it anyway, and what we're also discovering, Mike, is that they are coming up with different, essentially shell companies to run this stuff through so people don't know any better. That's another thing.
Well, what do you mean by that? They're setting up shell companies. They're moving from the manufacturer of the material, moving through a shell company, and then moving to the people who create the mesh product.
Right.
To try to wash the information.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, so as this goes forward, we're talking about a hernia mesh. What kind of injury does it cause? What should people be aware of?
So a lot of these products have these gimmicky coatings and things like that on them, and what we're seeing is the coating breaks down too soon. It doesn't work correctly, and these meshes actually they adhere to people's organs. They'll blow out too soon. They'll fail. Catastrophic injuries like bowel punctures, internal bleeding. We said organ perforations.
Does the material migrate through their system after it blows out?
It can. It absolutely can. It can blow out, it can move over, and then you can have some of this chemical leaching that goes on with this really low-grade stuff, high inflammatory responses that cause gut problems and things like that as well.
Robert, one of the things that struck me is this is a procedure that's not even necessary because a doctor that's trained without mesh can fix a hernia without any of this garbage, right?
A lot of times.
So industry came in and said, look, you need this because you're a doctor who's not a specialist in fixing hernias, but now you can increase your practice if you'll use our material. Isn't that kind of the scenario here?
That's right. We call them the gimmick meshes, which is they go to a doctor and say, yeah, we know this hernia is real small, and it would take you 20, 30, 40 minutes to do this, but it'll take you 5 minutes with this easy patch. They think, the doctors, a lot of times they think it's FDA approved, they think it's been studied, when it really hasn't. And a lot of times it's unnecessary. Doctors don't need to do it, but it happens because they sold them a bill of goods, and it turned out the truth is unveiled many years later.
Actually, when you look at the pelvic mesh cases, the juries jumped all over these companies, and these same companies, aren't they?
Right.
Robert, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thanks, Mike.
Finally tonight, some good news. A federal judge has warned several drug companies that they're going to have a hard time convincing a jury that 800% price hikes on diabetes drugs was necessary. Farron Cousin joins me to talk about this. We have done so many stories on the idea that the pharmaceutical industry is raping the American public, and it's amazing. It's amazing. When we do one of these stories, if we do a story, well, we hate Trump, there's going to be 200,000 people that show up for that. When we talk about something as important as this, there'll be 10, 15, 20,000 people. It's amazing that people aren't paying attention to this. Pick up the story.
I know this is crazy. And again, this is the result of a really good lawsuit where they're saying, hey, these two pharmaceutical companies basically colluded together to keep generics off the market for a couple more years. And in the course of the discovery here, they realized, like, well, hold up. Not only did you collude to keep generics off the market, you also kind of colluded to raise your prices by 800%, gouging consumers instead of, a couple dollars per pill to over $40 per pill. And the judge told him last week, said, you do realize you're going to have to go in front of a jury and you're going to have to explain to them why you did that. And that's not going to help your case.
I don't do this very often. I just cracked up when I read the defense lawyers for these companies. This guy is Lev, his name's Lev, L-E-I-V Blad. Okay, Lev Blad. He says, well, there's no antitrust taking place here, Judge. This is just good faith business dealing among friends. He said that. The other lawyer, another defense lawyer, says, Judge, we just raised the price 800% because we thought it was in the, he really said, I swear to God, we just raised it 800% because we thought it was in the shareholders' best interest. You think? So the point being, this judge showed some courage and said, you know what? We're going to let you make these arguments in front of a jury. Let's see what the jury thinks at the end of the day, right?
And that really is the best thing for the judge to do. Just sit there and say, listen, people are going to be paying attention to this case. And it's almost, taunting. I'm like, I want you to come out here and I want you to make that argument for everyone to hear, and let's see what happens.
Yeah, Lev Blad and David Marriott. I want to be there for this argument in front of a jury. I don't think it's going to float.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.